All right, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to United Israel World Union. This is our Sabbath morning service coming to you live from St. Francisville, Louisiana. The last few weeks we've been all over the world, and of course last week we had the storm and the potential for some really bad weather, so we called it early, and we postponed the service indefinitely, and then now we're back. So it's good to be here. Thank you for joining with us today. I love it when I can get back in my office. Of course, I enjoy my time in Israel, but today is exciting for me to be back, broadcasting live, all the easy technology of being in a nice, cush environment. You know, and we're not trying to figure out how to do this, driving down the road in a Jeep or whatever. So this is great. So welcome back. It is nice to be with you today. Today, I'm going to be sharing a message based upon the annual Torah reading for the day. The annual Torah reading, according to the cycle of readings followed by Judaism, we are in the book of Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers. Bamidbar means in the wilderness, and we just happen to be in Torah reading Balak. And Balak is a Torah reading that many of you may be familiar with. What got me into this is over the last several weeks in Israel, being in the wilderness, Bamidbar, and I'm thinking about the trek of the Israelites, and I'm standing on the ground in the wilderness, imagine if you will, and I'm reading the text of the Torah, and I'm placing myself in the biblical narratives, looking around with maps spread out before me and the biblical text before me, and I'm saying, here is where the children of Israel were. So you saw bits and pieces of that. Just so happened that some of the Torah readings just so happen to coincide geographically with where I was at the time. But that got me into the book of Numbers, and so it was hard to pull back out. So I'm still in the wilderness, though I'm back in the office in St. Francisville. So today I'm going to be talking and teaching, sharing a message from Torah reading Balak. Now, the message today I've titled Balaam's Book, The Pagan Prophecies. Balaam's Book, The Pagan Prophecies. In Hebrew, Balaam, his name in Hebrew is Balaam. So I might go back and forth because I'm thinking in biblical terms and the years of studying this story. Sometimes I might say Balaam, sometimes I might say Balaam, but you know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about a pagan prophet and some of the words that are attributed to him. Now, according to what we read in the Torah, Balaam's words within the narrative from chapter 22 of the book of Numbers through the 24th chapter of the book of Numbers, there is a flowing narrative, but that also contains four pericopes, or four sayings, if you will, four different pronouncements from this one who is known as Balaam. And I'm going to be focusing on these three chapters, which are contained between white spaces. In other words, from chapter 22, verse 1, all the way through the end of chapter 24 is the narrative that contains the story of Balaam. It was called anciently, this section of text, from the book of Numbers, chapter 22, verse 1, through the end of the chapter 24, was known anciently as Sefer Balaam, or the Book of Balaam. So I'm going to be focusing primarily on that particular section of text. Now, I'm also in the midst of studying for weekly classes and putting out the bulletin and so forth. Many of you know that I'm working on a particular book that is going quite well, by the way. I still feel that I am on schedule to release that. Early September is my goal. But I wanted to tell you that one of the things that I was studying, this particular research for the book pulled me into all sorts of sources, from the Dead Sea Scrolls to obviously the Hebrew Bible to rabbinic literature. And there's an interesting passage in Baba Batra, in Jewish writings, in Baba Batra. It's telling us, according to the rabbis, what did Moses write? Now, we traditionally believe Moses wrote the Torah from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 through Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 12. And in Baba Batra, it says that Moses wrote his book, whatever his book is, right? Most of you say, well, I know what his book is. It's the 5 books of Moses. Okay, you have to read my book. You have to read Ross's book, and I'll cover all that. But it also mentions specifically, it calls out, it says that Moses wrote his book, and he also wrote the book of Balaam, Sefer Balaam. So whatever that means to you right now, just think about it. But I wanted to make it clear that according to the rabbis, Moses records this incredible story that we're going to talk about today. The book of Balaam. Now, Josephus says this about the book of Balaam. He says that in regards to its narrative, meaning the narrative of the book of Balaam, readers are free to think whatever they please. Now, why do you think Josephus would say that about the book of Balaam? The book of Balaam contains, among other things, this fantastic tale of Balaam, the pagan prophet, who ultimately is on his way. He's been hired by Balak, the king of Moab, and he's on his way on a mission. Now, Balak wants him to curse the children of Israel. God initially tells him you can't go with them. He goes back after being urged by Balak to come to the area of the plains of Moab and to curse this people. And on his way, he's riding his donkey. And the donkey has open eyes. Now, it's interesting because Balaam, this pagan prophet, one of the things that he constantly says is that I, Balaam, have eyes wide open and so forth. But he can't see, interestingly enough, the Malach Jehovah, the angel of the Lord, who's standing in the way, making the way quite dangerous. The donkey sees the angel. The donkey refuses to go. Balaam beats the donkey, and the donkey begins to speak. Of course, from ancient times to modern times, people have made a mockery of this, and they laughed. You know, it's just one of those things that people make fun of. You who believe the Bible believe that a donkey talked and so forth. So Josephus responds to this, I believe, when he says, readers of the story are welcome to think whatever they please about the narrative of Balaam. What I want to do today is offer that same qualifier. You're welcome to believe whatever you want to believe. But I think that the insights contained within this particular story are very instructive. I think that they bring forward some very critical things that we ought to know. And I think they help to guide us in our faith and our walk in a way that might be quite surprising. I think that this particular story, the book of Balaam, is one of the most interesting in all of ancient literature, and particularly in the Torah itself, for a number of reasons. Now, one of the things that I want to put forward today, I have a file cabinet that's full of notes that I've taken over the years as I study and teach from the Torah portion. And one of the things that stands out in my notes year after year as I read through the Torah portions, whether I teach from the weekly annual cycle of reading or not, I always study the weekly portion. And one of the things that I've noted is that whether you're looking at geography, theology, archaeology, or technology, the book of Balaam has them all. Think about that. Geography, theology, archaeology, technology, all of these come together in quite a fantastic way in the Sefer Balaam. And so today, I want to show you how those four converge to present one of the most incredible stories in the history of written literature. When I was in Israel, one of the things that surprisingly caught my attention was an in-depth study. I didn't go over there intending to do this. What I do when I go to Israel, or even when I go to the grocery store, is I pray that God will somehow make something happen before me this day. I mean, I believe in providential meetings. I believe that there are times when things are beyond coincidence, and they often happen if we simply ask for them. So I go to Israel thinking that I'll just pound out this book and I'll finish the book, and, you know, I sort of have a little schedule in my mind. But in the wilderness, things don't always go according to your plan. They always go according to Jehovah's plan. And so I found myself in the midst of a study on the wilderness itineraries, the trek of the children of Israel. And many of you have studied this, but if you look at most Bible maps, in the map section of the Bible, you'll have, generally, you'll have, in a good Bible, you'll have a map of the wilderness journey, the possible route of the Exodus. And there are basically two proposed routes. There's a northern route and there's a southern route. I tend to go with the northern route. Does not mean, by the way, that the children of Israel don't go south in some parts of the journey. It doesn't mean I'm not illiterate. I can read that they go to Ezion Geber. I know that. They're going around the kingdom of Edom. But what I wanted to focus on today, and I'm not going to get into the wilderness itineraries today. I don't intend to. But in the 40th year, this is the setting of the story I'm going to tell you about. The children of Israel, during the 40 years in the wilderness, they get in trouble quite a bit. And you would think that maybe, say, by year 10, they would get it straight, or maybe by 15 or 20 or 25 or 30 or 35. No! Even in the 40th year, there are great departures from the fate that are recorded in the narrative. Today's class, Israel is in the 40th year of its wanderings. The children of Israel are by this point east of the Jordan. They're in the plains of Moab, or as the Hebrew calls it, the Aravot, the plains of Moab on the east side. They're across from Jericho. Now, this particular point is the last stop. They're in the proximity, the last place they're going to be outside the land before they cross into the land, and a great sin happens. They're like waiting to penetrate into the land that God has promised the forefathers, and they're still messing up. All right. They're at a place called Shittim. Shittim is from Shittah, which is, it means acacia. Acacia. Now, anybody who's been in that region, most of you have been on, at least on the west, if you've been to Israel, you've been on the west side of the Jordan, but geographically, in a north-south orientation, you've been in this area. And I know some of you have been on the east side of the Jordan in this area. One of the things that you'll see is these acacia trees. This area, in this arid region, there's quite a few of them today. So they're in a place called Acacia, Shittim. This is the final stop. If you read, by the way, according to, like when I'm studying the wilderness itineraries, beginning in Exodus 14, when they leave the land of Egypt, throughout the book of Exodus, in various points, you get certain clues of the travel, of the wanderings, or as it says in the Hebrew Bible, the pullings out. In other words, whenever they would pull out their stakes and move. So you get these wilderness stops. You also get them in Numbers, in the book of Numbers, chapter 21, chapter 33, Deuteronomy chapter 1 through 3, and then in Deuteronomy 10. Various texts, what I'm saying, is various texts mention these journeying points. And in the book of Numbers chapter 33, which proposes to be a wilderness log, a travel log of sorts recorded by Moses, the last place mentioned is a place called Avel Shittim. Now, Aval in Hebrew means to mourn. They're in mourning, right? Aaron and Miriam have died recently. It's still in that period of mourning. But Avel can also mean a meadow. The idea is that you're in the plains on the east side of the Jordan, preparing to cross over. Now, open with me. I just want to pick up one text. If you look at the book of Numbers chapter 25, Numbers chapter 25, verse 1. Israel abode in Shittim. The people began to commit harlotry with the daughters of Moab, and they called the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. And Israel joined himself to Baal Peor, and the anger of Jehovah was kindled against Israel. And then it goes on about this great sin. So this great sin takes place in this particular area known as Shittim, the last stop before they go into the land of promise. They've still not gotten it right. Now, look at Joshua chapter 2. I just want to give you another incident that happens here because they're still there. In Joshua chapter 2, verse 1, it says this. In Joshua chapter 2, verse 1, and Yehoshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, go view the land in Jericho. And they went and came to the house of a harlot by the name of Rachav and lodged there. So it was at Shittim that the children of Israel are camped strategically before they move into the land. And it's from here, not only that this great sin takes place, but it's from here that Moses gives the greatest orations. He delivers the Torah to the children of Israel in the plains of Moab. This is the area. So lots going on in Shittim. A great sin, the great revelation of the Torah that God gave to Moses to give to the children of Israel. And Joshua strategically places the children of Israel and sends forth spies from this place. But I want to add something that I think is quite significant. With all that's going on here at Shittim, it's between here at Shittim, at this location, and between the entry point into the land. In other words, from the last stop outside the land unto the reaching of the first stop in the land, that something quite significant takes place. A lesson, if you will. A lesson that we should all take note of. Why? Because we're told to. And a lot of people miss this. Something very significant will be revealed in this short span from Shittim to the crossing over into a place called Gilgal. Last place outside the land is Shittim. The first place in the land promised to the children of Israel is called Gilgal. It's the first place they go. Between Shittim and Gilgal, you got to know this. You have to. Go with me to the book of Micah, the prophet Micah. In Micah, I want to cover something. A lot of people miss this, but it's quite significant. Micah chapter 6, and I want to read beginning in verse 1. This is Jehovah speaking. Hear now what Jehovah says. Arise, contend before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hearken, O mountains, Jehovah's controversy, and you strong foundations of the earth. For Jehovah has a controversy with his people, and he will contend with Israel. O my people, what have I done to you, and wherein have I wearied you? Testify against me, because I brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of bondage. And I sent before you Moses and Aaron and Miriam. O my people, remember now what Balak, king of Moab, devised, and what Balaam, the son of Beor, answered him. Listen to this. From Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of Jehovah. Now, where it says righteous acts, in Hebrew it says literally the righteousnesses of Jehovah. Now, most associate God's greatness and his power and his acts on behalf of his people with the exodus from Egypt. I brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God, and so forth. People know that whenever you talk about Jehovah, his name is associated with the exodus. The exodus is key, bringing forth. But look, that promise to bring you forth from Egypt continues all the way to their taking possession of the land. It's not just, God didn't just bring them out of the bondage of Egypt to let them stay in the wilderness. There was a purpose all along to bring them into the land of promise. Now, they extended the time that it took to do that, as we know, but nonetheless, the goal was always to bring them into the land that he had promised. And what this particular text indicates is that from the beginning, when God set forth to redeem his people unto the time that he brought them into the promise, he was there guiding them all the way. Now, this is something that I think is quite instructive, is that God has promised to do something, and he will do it from the beginning all the way through to the completion of the matter. This is where people jump up and say, amen. It's this idea that every step along the way, despite the failings of the people, that Jehovah is going to fulfill his word. Now, what I think is interesting is that these two events, the exit from bondage and the entrance into a land of freedom, which, by the way, it still represents a land of freedom. During both of these, God's righteousnesses are made manifest. Notice specifically, listen again to verse 4 and 5. For I brought you up out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of bondage. I sent before you Moses and Aaron and Miriam, O my people. Same breath. Remember now what Balak, king of Moab, devised, and what Balaam, the son of Beor, answered him, from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteousnesses of Jehovah. God's redemption is not just about bringing people out of bondage, it's about bringing them into the promise. It's one thing to be free from bondage, it's another thing to be free to serve in a land that God has given you. It takes both. This is significant. Now, by the way, there's even a courtesy in this text. It says, Zachar na, remember please. Remember please, like please remember this. And the remember please is associated with this final trek from Shittim to Gilgal. Now we talk about the righteousnesses of Jehovah. That phrase occurs 5 times in Scripture. I'm going to give you these passages for your personal study. I'm not going to read them all, but all 5 of these are as follows. Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 21 mentions the righteousnesses of Jehovah. Judges chapter 5, verse 11 mentions the righteousnesses of Jehovah. 1 Samuel 12, 7. And I do want to read Psalm 103. Go with me to Psalm 103. This one also mentions the righteousnesses of Jehovah. Psalm 103. I'm beginning in verse 1. Of David. This is a psalm of David. Bless Jehovah, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless Jehovah, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all thy iniquities, who heals all thy disease, who redeems your life from the pit, who encircles you with love and compassion, who satisfies your old age with good, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. Jehovah executes righteousness and judgment for all that are oppressed. He made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the children of Israel. This particular passage in Psalm 103, in verse 6, the Lord executes judgment or executes righteousness. Here's what it says in Hebrew, Osei tzedakot Yehovah, making the righteousnesses of Jehovah. You see, the translations often miss the underlying Hebrew. So whenever you see this particular phrase, tzedakot Yehovah, the righteousnesses of Jehovah, what you're actually talking about is something has to do with salvation, deliverance, and justice for and on behalf of his people. It's always associated with salvation, deliverance, and justice for and on behalf of his people. Now Micah says, or Jehovah I should say, says through the prophet Micah, to remember please what Balak devised or schemed and what Balaam answered him. So I want to look at a few passages this morning. So I want to help you remember that because it's essential and it's tied to the righteousnesses of Jehovah and to his ultimately fulfilling his promise to the fathers, which I believe carries into the modern day. In other words, same God sitting on the throne, same God who made those promises will ultimately bring to pass everything that he said. So in Deuteronomy, we're going to look at a passage that relates to this story of Balaam. In Deuteronomy chapter 23, beginning in verse 4 in the Hebrew, verse 3 in the English, an Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of Jehovah. Even to their 10th generation shall not they enter into the congregation of Jehovah forever, because they met you not with bread and with water in the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam the son of Beor from Petor of Aram Naharaim to curse you. But Jehovah your God would not hearken to Balaam, But Jehovah your God turned the curse into a blessing. Because Jehovah your God loved you, you shall not seek their peace nor their prosperity for all thy days forever. Jehovah takes a curse and turns it into a blessing. Balaam is hired to curse the children of Israel by Balak, the king of Moab. Now, the king of Moab, by the way, Moab is a descendant of Lot. Ammon and Moab are Lot's sons. Remember, the daughters in the book of Bereshit and Genesis think that the end of the world has come, and they get their father drunk, and they sleep with him, and they have these children, Ammon and Moab. And the Moabites are the ones here, and the Ammonites, according to Deuteronomy 23, that God says, look, first of all, they didn't meet you with bread and water. Oh, and by the way, they hired someone to curse you. But God takes that curse and turns it to a blessing. And why does he do this? Says because he loves you. Now this is an indicator of the righteousnesses of Jehovah. This is Torah faith at the heart. God loves Israel and moves on their behalf in such a way that he can spin the outcome of an intended bad thing into something good, and it's all rooted in love. Now, Deuteronomy mentions love. The rest of the Torah doesn't mention this love relationship between God and Israel, only in Deuteronomy, but it's Moses' firsthand account. Moses, one who speaks peh el peh, mouth to mouth with God. He gets this message, he records this message of divine love for the children of Israel, and it's significant. Now, when Balak hires Balaam to curse Israel, we get this story. It comes out of the gate in Numbers chapter 22. And if you look at this with me, just to kind of set the stage, in chapter 22, it says the following, verse 1, And Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Emori, the Amorites, and Moab was sore afraid of the people because they were many, and Moab was seized with dread because of the children of Israel. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, Now shall this company lick up all that are round about us, as the ox licks up the grass of the field. And Balak, the son of Zippor, was king of Moab at the time. So he sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, to Petor, which is by the river, to the land of the children of his people, to call him, saying, Behold, there is a people come out from Egypt. Behold, they cover the face of the earth, and they abide over against me. Come now, therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people. They're too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall prevail, that we may smite them, and that I may drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed. Now, this particular statement is interesting to me. All the enemies of Israel, past, present, and undoubtedly in the future, have the same goal: to strike Israel, to prevail against them, and to drive them out of the land. Modern haters of the children of Israel have the same goal as we read about in the Torah. Perhaps, they say, we might be able to curse them and strike them and prevail against them and drive them from the land. One of the points of today's class is that that can't happen. It can't happen. We don't attribute the fact that it can't happen to any military prowess on Israel's part, even though they have a mighty military. It's not because of anything good that Israel has done, though Israel continues to do much good. But it's because of the righteousnesses of Jehovah. Look, if you read Deuteronomy chapter 9, he makes it clear. You're commanded in Deuteronomy, you're commanded in the Torah to be righteous. It's a given. But whether you are or not, Deuteronomy 9 says you're going into this land not because of your righteousness. You see, it's because of God's promise and because of His righteousness. And because the other inhabitants of the land committed grievous offenses. All those things still doesn't take away that Israel should be righteous. You're commanded to be righteous. You will take possession of the land, but don't get too high and mighty over it, right? Don't think that your own hand has done this, is basically the point of the Torah. But the enemies of Israel have always had the same goal, to strike and prevail against them, to obliterate them and rid them from the land. Now, Balaam is known for a special ability that he has. He's known in the ancient world. Look, if you look at a map from Aram Naharaim all the way to the plains of Moab, he fetches him from far. He wants to bring him in. Why? Because he knows that whatever Balaam says, when Balaam says you're blessed, you're blessed. When he says you're cursed, you're cursed. But what Balak doesn't know is that this mumbo-jumbo magic doesn't work when Jehovah is in the middle. Because Balaam knows this now. Balaam says on several occasions in the narrative, look, whatever I say, it can't come to pass unless Jehovah gives me these words. You can say, I curse Israel all you want to, but unless God says, say, curse Israel, it's not going to happen. Balaam knows this. So it's very interesting. In Deuteronomy chapter 23, we get an interesting bit of information. We read in Deuteronomy 23 that Jehovah is unwilling to listen to Balaam. He's unwilling to listen to Balaam. And he turns the curse into a blessing because he loves Israel. Look with me at Joshua 24, the book of Joshua 24. In Joshua 24, it says in verse 9, Then Balak the son of Zippor, king of Moab, arose and warred against Israel, and sent and called Balaam the son of Beor to curse you. But I would not listen to Balaam, therefore he blessed you still. So I delivered you from his hand. And then it says we went over at Jericho. So Jehovah says he didn't listen. He didn't listen to Balaam. Now, we don't get all the time from the narrative that Balaam is saying, let me curse him, let me curse him. But we get in the background from various other texts that this is going on. Jehovah refuses to listen. So whenever Balaam, like he opens his mouth, I picture it like this. Balaam is only allowed to speak what he's permitted to speak from Jehovah's mouth. So he might open his mouth thinking he's going to say, curse Israel, but he says, I bless you. It's turned. It's turned. This is what's so powerful about this particular passage. So he's not allowed. Now, look with me at the book of Nehemiah, chapter 13. Nehemiah 13 and verse 1. Nehemiah 13:1. All right, it says, on that day they read in the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever, because they did not meet the children of Israel with bread and with water, but hired Balaam against them, that he should curse them. But God turned the curse into a blessing. The Torah of Moses makes it plain, and this is a reference back to our Deuteronomy passage, that they didn't show kindness to Israel, and they sought to hire a sorcerer or a pagan prophet who was known for his skill in cursing and making it stick. They hire this guy. It doesn't happen. You ever hear kids? I don't know if they, I'm rubber, you're glue. What bounces off of me sticks. It's almost like he intends one thing, but it comes back on him, and what ultimately goes forward is a blessing. Now, Balaam was known in the ancient world, and he holds a couple of special distinctions, and these are as follows. Balaam is the earliest biblical figure attested in archaeology. Let me say that again. Of all the people mentioned in the Bible, archaeologically speaking, Balaam is the earliest in terms of time that we have archaeological evidence for. And that comes from a plaster inscription that was discovered in modern-day Jordan, east of the Jordan, at a place called Tel Deir Allah. Tel Deir Allah. And this was discovered in 1967. And on this inscription, which dates to the 8th century BCE, all right, so it doesn't go all the way back to the time of Balaam, but it's a story that was discovered that does not coincide with our biblical text. In other words, it's not the story. It's not the book of Balaam. It's another story about Balaam that's circulating in the ancient world. And the story of Balaam that's discovered on this plaster inscription, Balaam, who is known as a seer of the gods, right? He's got this ability to see when others can't see and what others can't see, because he beholds the visions of God. He has a troubling vision. He's invited into the divine council, if you will, where the gods are talking, and there is an impending disastrous calamity coming upon the earth, and it describes this in this inscription. So Balaam is the earliest attested biblical person discovered archaeologically. The story of Balaam, I often think about it in terms of the first temptation in the wilderness. Many people that are familiar with Christianity know of another temptation, but I like to think of the story of Balaam as a temptation in the wilderness. Balaam there's an adversary, first of all. There's an adversary who seeks to destroy Israel, and he tempts Balaam, come up to this high place and let me show you the kingdoms, right? You get the idea? He's in the wilderness, and he's tempted by an adversary. And he's caused to go up and look down on Israel. 3 times he's taken up to a very high place, a vantage point, and he's asked to curse Israel. Now, Numbers 24, 10 and 11, I'm not going to go there. I just want you to have it in your notes. There is one of the times where Balak is complaining. He says, I've hired you to curse this people, and 3 times you blessed them instead. So there are these 3 temptations. So I'll let you kind of make the connections as you want. Now, if we only read the words of Balaam about Israel, these 4 groupings of what turn out to be blessings, if you just read the words of Balaam, you might have a favorable opinion of this pagan prophet. I mean, really. If you read the words of Balaam, we're going to do that as I close later, but you would come away and go, I don't see what's wrong. But remember, Balaam intends to curse, but this is what God has twisted, or straightened, I should say. His words were twisted. God straightened these words to be a blessing. Now, this is quite interesting, but so Balaam, this pagan prophet, he's gifted with spiritual gifts. He has insight. He hears from Jehovah. He admits that he can only say what Jehovah permits him to say. He knows that he can't curse what Jehovah has blessed. It says he sees the visions of Shaddai. Right? He's gifted. He is a prophet. A pagan prophet, albeit, but he's a prophet. He describes long into the future from his days the defeat of Israel's enemies in the last days, the Acharit Hayamim, the last days. He sees a messianic figure, if you will, who is yet to come, who will help deliver Israel in the future. Now, he also has another distinction that very few have. Balaam and his story and or his words are mentioned in the Torah, in the prophets, and in the writings. Little homework assignment for you. See who else that we know of from biblical literature is mentioned in the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Very interesting. By name. Balaam tells us that God is not a man, nor a son of man that he should lie. Oh, that the world would accept this truth. The complexities of man are great. Again, if you just read his words, you would see him in a positive light. If there was a red-lettered edition of the book of Balaam, and it had his words in red, you'd read those words and say, very positive figure. But one cannot be judged solely or only on the eloquent words which come forth from one's mouth. While he ultimately pronounced blessing on Israel and was shown their ideal place, his intentions were not good. Rabbinic literature calls Balaam Beloam, which means without a people, and by which they mean without a share in the world to come with the people of God. In other words, Beloam is he's without a people. He's outside of the people. Or they'll refer to him as Balaam, the one who ruined the people. In Numbers 31:16, we read that Balaam is killed with the sword. He's murdered. He's not murdered. He's killed, and it's for a reason. 31:16. Look at this. It says, Behold, these caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to revolt against Jehovah in the matter of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of Jehovah. So what happens is he tries to curse. God turns his words into a blessing. He works closely with Balak and the others to devise a plan whereby the children of Israel fall prey to bad. They fall for the women of Moab in the matter of Peor, and ultimately bring a grave sin upon the children of Israel. Back in verse 8, it mentions also his death. They slew the kings of Midian, beside the rest of them that were slain, namely Avi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, Reva, 5 kings of Midian. Balaam also, the son of Beor, they slew with the sword. You know, if we only had his words, and we heard the tale that they slew Balaam with the sword, we would say, for what reason? He pronounced great blessings. Why on earth would you kill him? He's called a soothsayer in Joshua 13:22. But despite his end and his bad intentions, some of his words continued to echo through the ages. Quite beautiful and prophetic. Why? Because they're the words of Jehovah. He's speaking not his own words, but the one that sent him. The words that come forth from the mouth of Balaam, his crooked words having been straightened by Jehovah, he speaks forward blessing, prophecy, and good things that represent the righteousnesses of Jehovah. One utterance in particular from the lips of Balaam have come to be part of the liturgy of the synagogue service every Sabbath day. A pagan prophet who intended to curse Israel would be rolling over in his grave to know that every Shabbat Jews are saying his words. Ma tovu ohaleka Yaakov, mishkanoteka Yisrael. Go with me to the book of Numbers 24. When Balaam saw that it pleased Jehovah to bless Israel, he went not, as at other times, to seek for enchantments, but he set his face toward the wilderness. Balaam lifted up his eyes, and he saw Israel abiding according to the tribes, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he took up this discourse and said, the speech of Balaam, the son of Beor, the speech of the man whose eyes are open, the saying of him who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of Shaddai, falling down, but having his eyes open. How goodly are thy tents, O Jacob, your tabernacles, O Israel. Like the winding brooks, like the gardens by the river's side, like aloes which Jehovah has planted, and cedar trees beside the waters. He goes on. Matovu. Oh, how good. This particular saying comes across every Shabbat. And it's the words of Balaam, a pagan prophet. What is good? What is good is it can only be seen within the Spirit, if you will, at the present. When the Spirit of God comes upon Balaam, it's then that his eyes are open. It's then that he can look out and see the beauty that is intended, the ideal Israel. I mean, it's interesting that when Balak hires Balaam to curse the children of Israel, all they see is a fearful, fear-inspiring mass of people. They are many. They'll lick up the dust. They'll overtake us, right? They had no intention. Israel had no intention of doing that to Moab, but that's the perception of the others. But from the Spirit, when he looks out and he sees them encamped together, he is then able to say, Ma tovu, oh how good. Ma what? Tovu, tov, good. So what is good? What is good? It reminds me of a song of David. Psalm 133, behold how good. Hine matov, just like matovu. Hine matov. Uma naim. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. It's like the precious ointment upon the head, running down upon the beard of Aaron, running down over the hem of his garments like the dew of Hermon, descending upon the mountains of Zion, for there Jehovah has commanded the blessing, even life forevermore. Psalm 133. This particular psalm is very interesting in its association with matovu, what is good. There's one other text that's tied to what is good. And it brings us back to where we started. It's in Micah chapter 6. It's where we started the class, and it ties in with everything that we've talked about. Go back with me where we started in chapter 6, verse 5. O my people, remember now what Balak, king of Moab, devised, and what Balaam, the son of Beor, answered him. From Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteousnesses of Jehovah. With what shall I come before Jehovah and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will Jehovah be pleased with thousands of rams, or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He's told you, O man, what is good, ma tov. And what does Jehovah require of you, or what does he ask of you? But to do justice, to love loving kindness, and to walk circumspectly with your God. When brethren dwell together in unity, remembering the righteousnesses of Jehovah, doing what is pleasing to him, then that person will know what is good and what God has done, or what has God wrought, to quote our man Balaam. There are a couple of other interesting associations with Balaam, where Balaam is tied in with some interesting storylines. In 1844, a man by the name of Samuel was working on a new technology. 1844. And this technology, state of the art at the time, involved transmitting a written message from one location to another, a distant location. And it is the name that they gave to this new technology used two Greek words, tele, which means far, and graphe, which means write. So it's a way, according to this new technology of Samuel, to transfer a written message far. His test was to send a set of characters from Washington to a friend of his who was in Baltimore, Alfred Vail. And on May the 24th, 1844, at 8:45 in the morning, he sent a message. And the words of that message that were transferred far from Baltimore to Maryland, Samuel had asked a daughter of his friend to come up with the message. The message that Annie Ellsworth selected to be sent on Shavuot, by the way, was taken from the words of a pagan prophet by the name of Balaam. And the words were, "What hath God wrought?" So after all the time, when the words of a pagan prophet, who aside from Sabbath services and some Sunday school classes over thousands of years, outside of that, a pagan prophet's words were unknown. But in 1844, on Shavuot, this particular message, including the words of the pagan prophet Balaam, were associated with technology. So Balaam is tied, interestingly enough, into theology. His story is associated with us knowing about the righteousnesses of Jehovah. It's tied in with archaeology, in that he is the earliest person from the Bible known to us from a discovery in archaeology. And in technology, Balaam, the pagan prophet, shows up. But as far as the technology goes, there's another one that I find interesting, and I've written about this. For some reason, technological advances favor Balaam's words. On Erev Shabbat, June the 29th, 2007, the technology giant Apple released its latest device. It was called an iPhone. It was called Revolutionary. And it was released June 29, 2007, and the Torah reading that week was Balak. Moses wrote the book of Balaam. In regards to its narrative, readers are free to think whatever they please. But it's interesting to note that the words of this man, straightened by Jehovah's hand, have come to be a blessing to the people of Israel to this very day, and a blessing to the people of the world in terms of their association with technological advances. We've come a long way since the telegraphy, but because of the advancements in technology, which interestingly enough are associated with Balaam, I'm able to come to you live on Shabbat every Sabbath and share a message. And today, we've learned about what is good. Ma tovu. Israel dwelling together in unity is good. And God has shown us what is good and what He asks of us: to do justice, to love loving kindness, and to walk circumspectly with our God. Shabbat Shalom. So we'll take a couple of minutes of a break, and we'll come back for a dialogue in a little while.